do it?
Huh? Let me just
Sure.
put it there just in case.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeremy Siegel with Bjarke Ingels Group. I'm joined by my colleagues Matthijs Bouw with One Architecture and Brice Sarte with Sherwood. We are joined by a larger team of transportation, economics, and coastal engineering experts, and many of them are in the audience. And as always, we're really excited to be here and being able to think about the future of this region with you all. For us, the Bay is a really kind of incredible place because it is emblematic of this dynamic that exists in many cities around the world. It's a place that has an incredible natural richness and resource, and that is why people have kind of flocked here for centuries to take advantage of those resources. And at the same time, that occupation is the very thing that threatens it. So if you look from early settlement, Native American, to a series of towns during the gold rush, the Bay has just kind of been expanding sequentially to the point that now it really works as one region, but at a scale that is sort of disproportionate to any means to control it. And it's that kind of sprawl and development pattern that has led to the urban challenges that we know today, from transit and congestion to housing, lack of affordable housing and displacement that results, strained infrastructure bringing flows from far away, ecological decline along the Bay's edge. And those development patterns and the kind of emissions and all the lifestyle associated with it have also been in part responsible for the climate stresses that the Bay feels today. From sea level rise and storm flooding to drought and wildfires, to earthquakes and liquefaction. And so our approach to the Bay has been that climate stresses and urban stresses are really one. And in order to build a more resilient Bay, we need to work on both equally. Simply put, to become more resilient, sustainable, and equitable, and to deal with some of these challenges, the Bay needs to link its natural systems to its urban systems in a better way. It needs better transit. It needs more housing in the right places. And it needs to modernize and decentralize its infrastructure to build resiliency. We're also cognizant of the way that things are done in the Bay Area, which is also a kind of a symptom of many cities, certainly in this country, that the kind of silos of city making really don't talk to one another. I think the Bay in particular, you see ecological discussions completely separated from urban discussions. Transit works on kind of its own logic, infrastructure, and people all kind of work separately. So simply put, our proposal is that we need to think of all of these elements together as one, what we call a social ecosystem, where ecological planning provides a framework for growth, where transit responds to growth rather than the other way around, or rather growth responds to transit rather than the other way around. Where all the kind of incredible ingenuity and resources of the people of the Bay work to develop these systems, and where infrastructure is decentralized and localized into community. So if this is the Bay today, we've developed a series of proposals at a regional scale. These proposals all kind of find a place geographically as a framework, beginning with the kind of creek system that once really defined the Bay, that's been culverted and tunneled over years and sprawled around. Can these creeks become a new kind of framework for the Bay, allowing for an increment for sea level rise adaptation and kind of a new unit of community? Can we peel back decades of paved over surfaces in the uplands, allowing for better recharge of the groundwater and fighting drought? Can we use the assets that the Bay has to build better transit rather than building new kind of shiny infrastructure? Can we use our roads, use the Bay itself, use our trails, and better connect things in a more flexible way? And can we rediscover the edge of the Bay, both as a place for ecology, but also as a place for people? So we've looked at 3 design opportunities, and to give you a little bit of a sense of our process, we'll start with the first one up at the Golden Gate. Given that kind of the initial frame for this competition was sea level rise, and it is one of the more acute risks in the area, We were curious about the kind of dynamic between local adaptation, which we think can and should take place in order to adapt to sea level rise. It might happen in different ways in different parts of the bay. But we also know that there's a lot of uncertainty about the extent of sea level rise and the kind of numbers we're going to be dealing with in the future. So we were interested in looking at a kind of regional strategy that would take a component of this risk, tidal, kind of annual king tides and storm surge, and deal with it on a regional level. We looked at the kind of difference between 500 miles of investment in levees to keep up with potentially extreme height, and also a series of locations for tidal barriers, including the Dumbarton Bridge, the Bay Bridge. And then we looked at the Golden Gate Strait itself, the location of the BCDC competition several years back. And we developed kind of an alternative proposal for this area, which would build on the 7-mile crescent of shoals, which is left by a sediment deposit coming out of the bay, and basically at about 30% of the same material that it would take to build a barrier in the deep kind of prism there, about 7 million cubic yards of fill, you could create a barrier that would take care of those more extreme levels of sea rise and tidal inundation while allowing for maritime traffic and so on. So this is something that we think is interesting. It's something that we think should be looked at, but we also kind of focused our attention on a series of other sites at a more local scale, starting with Islayas Creek.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I will do my best to see the screen at this angle. Well done. Bree Sarte with Sherwood Design Engineers. And Islayas Creek is, I think, a really important site that's been at the center of a lot of the industrial activity in San Francisco, and is also the site of one of the original ecological and wetland systems that no longer exist in any serious scale in San Francisco. In particular, this part of San Francisco was culverted and put into creeks at the formation of the city and the development of the southeast part of San Francisco. The need for the expansion of freeways and circulation infrastructure has added additional layers on top of Islayas Creek for circulation and transportation. And beyond that, are you seeing a black screen or, yeah? So, and beyond that, this has become a hub for a lot of the maritime activity and port activity on the waterfront, which has changed in nature and scale over time, but still has a deep water harbor and significant productive use, including providing a number of jobs, which we've heard from people living in the neighborhood are extremely important to preserve in that location. It is a very challenged part of the city from a sea level rise and flooding perspective, not just at the waterfront, but all the way up to the top of the ridge near Twin Peaks, where in this watershed basin there is flooding very often that creates a combined sewer flood condition in a number of parts of the neighborhood. So our proposal would start to address that, and in particular, much of the industrial land that is in purple in this slide is positioned in what was historically marshland in this part of San Francisco. Here we've overlaid the major 2 freeways that run through this neighborhood that effectively connect or pass over the 2 residential communities of the Dog Patch and the Bayview, Dog Patch to the north and Bayview to the south. So we see this part of the city as an incredible opportunity. It's one that the city has put forward as a design opportunity for us to consider, and so we've taken a really bold approach, we believe, to say what could be possible here. It started with listening to people in the neighborhood, to touring all the different sites with many of you. And our proposal starts with an idea that really says, could this be a place where San Francisco creates a 300-acre restored wetland and riparian system as part of a restored marsh? Could we take what is now a small inlet that once was one of our most important creekways and really restore it substantially to the south and to the west, and take advantage of a rare, if not the only, last opportunity in San Francisco to really think about managing stormwater and floodwater in a different way. There are proposals that we have in San Francisco to contain the 1 in 5 year storm. That's the minimum and maximum level of service that the infrastructure is meant to contain. So what happens to the 6-year and 100-year and 500-year storm? We think there's a great opportunity to do something substantial and ecological in this part of San Francisco. And to take the existing channel and to transform the southern side, to take some of that 300 acres of industrial land to create vertical industrial development opportunities for a net positive increase in the density and development of this neighborhood to provide more jobs than there are today, but in a more compact location that allows for the ecology of this to come closer to its original form. So you can start to see this evolution that might actually be facilitated by moving some of the heavy industrial uses potentially to a new series of barges or a reconfiguration of Brisbane Bay to the south, and potentially even relocating parts, if not the entirety, of the wastewater treatment plant that is currently adjacent to the Bayview neighborhood. So we don't have all of the answers in the sequencing to this, but we have a good idea of the process today and the potential evolution to more ecologically integrated means of managing and processing wastewater at this massive facility that today takes 80% of the city's wastewater. Could that start to be thought about differently? We think so as part of our proposal. And I think Jeremy is going to continue with a couple more ideas.
Sure. So this gives you a sense of the resource recovery park and plant on the edge that Bree just talked about. Click. All right. So what all of these infrastructural improvements do is provide a frame for resilient growth. And as Bree said, what we heard loud and clear from the community when we visited was that the kind of industrial jobs that are in the neighborhood should not just be protected, but they should be increased. So what we propose is a densification of industry, logistics connected to the Deepwater Port, maintaining this area as a critical node for San Francisco to its south, and taking this kind of low-rise industrial area that sits in the floodplain and really densifying it. We also see opportunities to connect. I-280 has been contemplated for a long time, this spur that juts off of the 101 and runs north for a decommission and potential demolish. And for us, the cost of demolishing it might actually be better spent to enhance it, not as a machine for cars, but rather as a machine for light mobility, for pedestrian connectivity, with spurs reaching into the neighborhood. This Lace Creek in the background. So from a gray, kind of tunnelized, culverted creek, disconnected along the transect, to an activated natural and also industrial heart for Bayview. And we also see this really as no small plan. If San Francisco itself has Golden Gate, which serves a huge area around it, there's really a lack of this kind of open space in this part of the city. So we really see Isleas Park as the green, resilient, and industrial heart for this part of the city.
So I'll talk a bit about the South Bay design opportunity that we have. And of course, we call it South Bay living because we think that South Bay is known for many things, but not really for living. If you can even afford it, it's not good for living. It's for traffic jams. It's for Silicon Valley, it's for inequity and all these things. One of the things of the South Bay is that you see many of the urban stresses coming together in the South Bay, and those will be compounded by climate-related stresses that come from sea level rise. And we feel that it's very difficult to address these stresses so far, in part because of the sort of atomized way in which the Bay has organized itself. So what we think and what we want to propose is a sort of systems perspective on the South Bay, which maybe starts with thinking about mobility and transit, where you see that it's really car-oriented. A Caltrain comes there, but hardly anyone ever uses it, which is logical because there's no way to get from the stations to the different working places that are there. And that's why even big ideas, which we all enthusiastically work on, specifically Jeremy and his firm like the Hyperloop, are the things that we don't think are opportune here. We think that, especially given the innovative culture that is there, you might really look at developments in mobility technology, and you might want to look at the existing assets that are there, the trails, the highways, maybe even the ferries. So we think that if you want to approach mobility, you might want to start thinking, can we activate these trails for e-bike mobility? Can we start to think how then these e-bikes could sort of connect both to the uplands, to the different workplaces, but also maybe to a ferry-related system. This ferry boat, of course, is too big and will have difficulty getting into the South Bay, but you can imagine that in the future, especially with sea level rise, there's whole new sets of ferry technologies that can actually work very well there. A sort of second component of that mobility strategy would be to rethink the highways which are now big arteries, clogged arteries through the South Bay. This is another black screen. And that image would have shown you a BRT system. And maybe we don't want to show a BRT system because we built on it, but we also think that it can be rethought into the future. Bus rapid transit can maybe be implemented on the highways, and with the advent of new car technology can become vehicle rapid transit with stations on the highway, which could be connected to developments on either side of the highway. A sort of second component of that thinking is once you start to think about how can we use these developments in vehicle technology, you start to look differently at these parking places that are now both large swaths of impervious surfaces that might not be needed in the future because the mobility changes. So you can really think maybe we can densify them at parts, we can build other programs there, and at the same time green them and create spaces for water there, so that we really make the let's say gray grid into what you could call a green grid. And we made the calculations there and figured out that more than 500,000 dwellings plus a lot of jobs could be done at a relatively modest height. And that sort of brings, if you link those two systems together, you can really start to think about a densification strategy in the South Bay, to which a third element, the ponds, could be fantastic assets. These ponds, and people have talked about it, are what we think will not function in the long term as a nature system, as a natural system. They've never really been that, so we think that they should really be explored as a constructed environment with a lot of different functions that they could have. Ponds could be there for algae production. They could be used as batteries. They can be used to retain stormwater. They can do solar. And in the end, once you start thinking about that, you can start thinking about floating villages there that in themselves can also start to become interesting elements for innovations, where you sort of link these systems together on a sort of smaller scale. And we feel that as we talk to the people in those areas and we understand their stresses, but we also understand their forward trajectories, that there's really a project a project that not only works to create a lot of housing, a different view on mobility, but which can also give a different sort of signature on the bay. I'm going to let these films roll and give it to Jeremy.
So imagining, as Matthijs said, not only infrastructural functions, but also living at the edge. And I know we're out of time, so I'll just close by saying that for us, climate change, there's here kind of everything just coming together as one system. So I'll just close by saying that for us, climate change adaptation is about solving problems, but in the end, it's also an incredible opportunity to make places better. So whether it's South Bay having a new kind of appeal on par with South Florida, or a new green, resilient heart for Isleas Park, we really see opportunities in the Bay to rediscover nature, to rediscover all of the systems that have been kind of disconnected from one another, and create a better place to live. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So we're really excited now that we've seen all these incredible ideas to share them with the public tonight and share them broadly. So one logistical issue, if your video that you submitted has a private setting, please make sure that you switch it to public as soon as possible, because those are going to be connected to our Neighborland site so people can see them. So anyway, that's just, presumably you know who you are if you're the person who does that on your team. So please go check that out, or ask Zoe if you have any questions, or Emma. And then we saw lots of great social media posts today, letting people know about this. I think we'll be pushing this out to our lists and throughout our network, and would ask teams to share as well throughout this comment period to let people know. We want to get lots of feedback from these initial ideas. I think we're really trying hard to make sure people understand that this is the beginning of a conversation, that we're really excited to bring more people into the process throughout the design phase once sites are identified. So getting that early feedback from people throughout cities, counties, community organizations, and other residents about what they're excited about, what they'd like to be involved in, is going to be really important. So we'd love to see your channels push those out as well. And then with that, I just, again, want to thank my staff for all the work that they've done throughout this whole time. It's really an incredible team, and they've been asked to move mountains, and they have, so we're really excited to celebrate with you tonight and share this with the public.